In March of 1942, the territory of Alaska was an island in everything but geography. It possessed thousands of miles of coastline, critical deep-water harbors, and direct proximity to East Asia. Yet it had no overland connection to the rest of North America. Every crate of ammunition, every gallon of aviation fuel, and every replacement rifle destined for northern garrisons had to travel by sea through the Gulf of Alaska. 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, that sea lane became a strategic liability. Imperial Japanese submarines were active in the Pacific, and military planners in Washington realized a sobering truth. If the Japanese Navy cut the coastal shipping lanes, North America's entire northwestern frontier would be left completely isolated. The United States Army needed a land route. They needed a heavy-duty highway capable of carrying military convoys through 2 Canadian provinces and across thousands of miles of unmapped Arctic wilderness. And they needed it completed before the Arctic winter froze the continent solid. For decades, civilian engineers had dismissed an Alaska highway as an expensive fantasy. The distance was immense, the terrain was dominated by jagged mountain ranges, and the ground was covered in vast stretches of permafrost. In early 1942, the War Department decided it could no longer afford to wait. President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized the project in February 1942, reaching an agreement with the Canadian government. Canada agreed to grant the right-of-way, provided the United States covered the entire cost of construction and handed the Canadian section back after the war. The objective was not to build a smooth, paved civilian highway. The Army needed what it called a pioneer road, a rough, double-lane gravel track wide enough for heavy military transport trucks. The deadline was set for 8 months. If the road was not open by late autumn, the logistical chain supporting northern airfields would collapse. The starting line was established at Dawson Creek, British Columbia, a small railhead hundreds of miles north of the United States border. The finish line was Delta Junction, Alaska, where the route would connect to existing local roads leading into Fairbanks. Between those 2 points lay more than 1,500 miles of dense boreal forest, roaring rivers, and unmapped mountain passes. To build a road of that length in 8 months, the Army Corps of Engineers could not simply start at one end and push forward. That strategy was too slow. Instead, commanders divided the route into strategic sectors. Engineers were deployed to multiple nodes along the path simultaneously. Some troops moved north from Dawson Creek. Others were shipped by sea to coastal ports like Skagway, loaded onto narrow-gauge mountain railways, and dropped into the deep interior at Whitehorse. 7 main engineer regiments would build toward each other, cutting the forest from both ends and the middle at the same time. In March and April of 1942, more than 10,000 United States Army troops began arriving at northern staging areas. Trains unloaded thousands of tons of equipment at Dawson Creek. Heavy bulldozers, steam shovels, dump trucks, portable sawmills, and millions of rations. The operational strategy relied on speed. Survey crews worked several miles ahead of the main construction units, hacking through brush to mark the path with surveyor tape. Right behind them came the lead bulldozers. Heavy Caterpillar tractors rammed directly into full-grown spruce and pine trees, knocking them down and clearing a swath 50 to 90 feet wide. Behind the lead tractors, secondary crews cleared stumps, graded the earth, and installed wooden culverts across small streams. In the first few weeks, when the ground was still frozen rock-hard by winter frost, progress was remarkably fast. But as spring arrived in May, the engineers ran directly into a physical environment that nearly destroyed the entire effort. The primary enemy of Arctic engineering is not snow or ice. It is muskeg. Muskeg is a layer of decaying vegetation and moss resting on top of permanently frozen soil known as permafrost. In winter it is solid, but when spring temperatures rise, the top layer of vegetation melts while the ice beneath prevents water from draining away. When the Army's heavy bulldozers scraped off the top layer of moss and brush, they exposed the underlying permafrost to the sun. The ground dissolved into a bottomless soup of liquid mud. 40-ton tractors sank up to their cabs. Trucks buried their axles within yards of leaving dry ground. By late May, construction had ground to a virtual halt, with less than 100 miles of road completed. To save the project, engineers had to stop digging into the ground and start building on top of it. They adopted a technique known as corduroying. Soldiers fell thousands of trees by hand, laying whole logs side by side across the mud to form a wooden raft. They covered the logs with branches, gravel, and dirt, creating a flexible foundation that insulated the permafrost below. It was brutal, back-breaking labor that consumed thousands of logs for every mile of track. To keep up with the overwhelming demand for manual labor, the War Department made a decision it had previously avoided. In 1942, the United States military was strictly segregated. Prejudiced military doctrine held that African American troops should not be assigned to cold climate engineering roles, claiming they lacked the technical capability or endurance for Arctic conditions. Faced with a critical shortage of manpower, the Army deployed 3 black regiments: the 93rd, 95th, and 97th Engineer General Service Regiments, along with the 388th Battalion. More than 3,600 African American soldiers were sent to the Canadian wilderness, representing over 1/3 of the total military force on the highway. Despite performing the same grueling work as white units, these black regiments faced severe discrimination. While white troops were often housed in wooden barracks or insulated Quonset huts, black soldiers lived in canvas tents in sub-zero temperatures. In many sectors, heavy machinery was reserved for white regiments, leaving black engineers to clear forests and build bridges using axes, cross-cut saws, and hand shovels. The true capability of these units became clear at the Sakani Chief River in British Columbia. In May 1942, the rushing, ice-filled river blocked the advance of the highway. The 95th Engineer Regiment, an all-black unit under white officer command, was ordered to build a 300-foot heavy wooden bridge across the torrent. Working without heavy cranes or prefabricated steel, the men waded waist-deep into freezing mountain water to set timber piles. They cut trees from the surrounding hillsides, squared the logs by hand with broadaxes, and secured the structure under continuous round-the-clock shifts. The Army estimated the bridge would take at least 2 weeks to complete. The soldiers of the 95th finished it in 84 hours. The bridge was strong enough to support 40-ton military transports and stood for years after the war, proving that the technical limitations attributed to black troops existed only in the minds of military planners. In June 1942, the strategic crisis that launched the project became an immediate reality. A Japanese naval task force launched airstrikes against the United States Naval Base at Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Days later, Japanese infantry landed on the Aleutian Islands of Attu and Kiska, occupying sovereign North American territory. For the first time since the War of 1812, an enemy power occupied land in North America. The threat to Pacific shipping routes intensified instantly. The Alaska Highway was no longer just a precautionary backup plan. It was now the primary overland artery required to fuel military bases and staging airfields across the Northwest. Work shifts were extended to 16 and 20 hours a day. Under the summer sun, where northern latitudes provided near 24-hour daylight, soldiers worked continuously through clouds of biting black flies and mosquitoes. The progress variable shifted from miles per week to miles per day. By October 1942, the northern and southern sectors were closing in on each other in the Yukon Territory near the Alaskan border. Temperatures were dropping rapidly, signaling the imminent return of winter. On October 28, 1942, exactly 8 months and 12 days after authorization, a bulldozer driven by Private Refine Sims, an African-American soldier from the 97th Engineers, met a bulldozer driven by Private Gene Lynch, a white soldier from the 18th Engineers, in the forest near Beaver Creek. They had cut through 1,600 miles of mountain passes, forests, and frozen swamps. They had constructed more than 200 bridges and installed thousands of culverts. The Pioneer Road was complete. Less than a month later, on November 20, 1942, the first military truck convoy made the complete journey from Dawson Creek to Fairbanks. The Alaska Highway was an extraordinary achievement of rapid engineering, yet its role in World War II is often misunderstood. The road was not primarily used for massive armored divisions or heavy land battles. Instead, it served as a vital logistical spine for the Northwest staging route. Along this chain of airfields, more than 7,900 American-built warplanes were flown north to Alaska. where Soviet pilots took control of them under the Lend-Lease program and flew them into combat on the Eastern Front. The highway ensured that these remote airfields received a steady supply of fuel, spare parts, and cold weather equipment throughout the war. Beyond its wartime utility, the highway altered the military institution that built it. The exceptional performance of black engineer regiments in the Arctic directly challenged military segregation policies, serving as key evidence when President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981 in 1948, officially desegregating the United States Armed Forces. What began as a desperate 600-mile gamble through frozen forest was never just a road. It was a demonstration of logistical power, showing that under the pressure of war, an empire could move mountains, bridge frozen rivers, and alter its own history in less than 9 months.